We have a lot to talk today, Tom.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it within an hour, 5 minutes, but we have a lot to talk. Um,
Okay.
Hello, welcome to Cheyenne's Forum. Today is October 8th. Right now, the time is Pacific time 9:05. Hello, Tom. Thank you so
Hello.
much for coming to our program.
Oh, hello. Thank you for inviting me.
So nice to see you. And then Tom is my dear friend, and he worked in FBI for 30 years. And with almost 5 years, he worked as the direct assistant director, and he's retired now. And Tom, we have a lot of to talk today. So let's go first thing first about the election. We see that Musk, our dear Musk, is fully engaged. He endorsed Trump at the past Saturday at Butler. It is really the historical moment. So first, I just wonder, what do you think about his endorsement and his all in to support Trump? Will this affect the election, or if yes, how?
Well, I don't think it could hurt him because,
Mhm.
he's highly respected. And I think that especially younger people who are more academic oriented in science and research and all of the things that he's developed. So what he's done with not just Tesla and electric cars, but the space program that he's created. And I think it's interesting that, Boeing failed to be able to return the astronauts that they took to the space station. So
Yeah,
what was supposed to be, a week or two visit to the space station turned into months. And if it wasn't for Musk, who knows how long they'd be stranded there. So he's the one that finally was able to send his spaceship up and of course, that makes the U.S. government irate that he has to be the one to save them because they don't like the Biden administration does not like Musk. And I think that they use the excuse when they had the big a couple of years ago, they had the big summit of electric car makers. Biden met with them. They didn't even invite Musk, and he's the number one electric car maker in the world. But the reason was Biden claiming to be he's in support of unions and Musk doesn't have the United Auto Workers working at his factory. So therefore he's no good. And Musk just sits back and says, okay, I'll just keep building the more technologically advanced car, the car that works better, all of those factors. Now I'll build spaceships that work better than your ships being built by DEI companies like Boeing and
hmm
and others. And so NASA ends up having to go, okay, we concede. We don't have the ability to send one of our sponsored aircraft up. Please go up and rescue our astronauts from the space station.
hmm
So, thank you, Musk, because, you remember during the Obama administration that our astronauts got to the space station and came home with Russian spaceships. We did when Obama stopped the shuttle program, we didn't have the ability to even go up into space anymore.
Right.
So so here comes Musk, not only, going to the space station for him is a walk in the park. Here's a guy that's building spacecraft to go to the moon and go to Mars. He
Mhm.
wants to have a Mars program,
Mhm.
and his technology is the best.
Right. It seems like,
And the administration absolutely doesn't want to admit it until they
Mhm.
have to ask him, please go up and rescue our astronauts. We don't have, our companies can't bring them back. So
Exactly. So,
I think from that standpoint, and then the other aspect is buying Twitter and then trying to eliminate their censorship programs and transform the company into X and fire many of the woke employees. And he hasn't done it to all of them yet, but it's in progress. I'll put it that way. And I
Mhm.
think that that's a huge difference. So basically, he shows that he's not going to be censored. He's not going to be intimidated. He's going to do what he thinks he needs to do. Uh, and so far, that's been very successful. So for somebody like him, endorse Trump and be so enthusiastic about it is not so much that he absolutely loves Trump. We don't know if he does or not, but it does show his absolute disrespect for the Biden administration and then now for Kamala Harris. And
Mhm.
so he's basically saying, look, you may not like Trump, but he's better than the other party, the other candidates. And so I think to me, it's a big deal.
Mhm. Mhm. Why to you is a big deal? Because he's so powerful, or because he's masked? He's not someone else. Why he's so special? You mentioned that he's so big at
Well,
tech.
all of the above, and plus he represents the future. He represents future technology, future. I think Amen, Americans were not happy when the space program abruptly ended. When the
Right.
Obama administration decided it's too expensive, we're not going to do it anymore. Part of the reason being that when they set spaceships up, the only alternative for the later they would get back the actual capsule that parachuted onto the ocean, and they would try to recover it before it sank in the ocean. So some of the capsules from the early days we can see at the Air and Space Museum and see them on display. But all of the rocket, the Saturn V mighty rocket, biggest rocket ever built, all of the stages of that rocket are at the bottom of the ocean. In the meantime, Musk sends his ship up and it comes back and lands vertically so that it can on land safely where it can be reused. No one else has developed an aircraft that can do that or a spacecraft capable of doing that, but he did it. And they do it routinely. Now, there's been a couple of failures here and there, but all things considered, it's a massive success on his part and
Right.
on his technicians and scientists to put an aircraft together like that and then
Mhm.
fly it into space and bring it back in one piece.
Right. And I think he's really smart, and he's smart enough to realize that this is the last election if we do not have Trump go back to White House. He knows that, and he knows that so clear. Do you think it's something to do with his childhood memory that he was in South Africa, or he just smart enough to realize that, which a lot of Americans have not realized yet?
I think it's probably both, but there's so many people who have come to the United States, were born in Africa or Asia or Europe, and came here. And many of the most patriotic Americans, naturalized American citizens, have that kind of background. They didn't grow up in the United States spoiled, no fear, every whim taken care of, basically for most Americans.
Mhm.
And that's compared to the sacrifice. And from your growing up and your coming here, and
Right.
all of your friends and your friends of friends who introduced me to you and to this podcast, that's
Mhm.
how they feel.
Mhm.
Very, very patriotic. And that's how, my wife's friends, we first went to a Trump rally in 2016,
Mhm.
and just the timing of when we parked in the lot, and it was many hours before the rally. This was
Mhm.
down in Fredericksburg, Virginia.
Mhm.
And we get in line, and who's in line at the same time? And they're wearing white T-shirts, Chinese Americans for Trump. And I met many of them,
Mhm.
and all naturalized U.S. citizens. They had come over and they weren't spoiling their children. Many of them were 30s, 40s, 50s in high tech industries, in computer industry. And
Mhm.
they made, no bones about it. Our children are not going to be spoiled or take the United States for granted. We discipline them. We encourage academic achievement and other achievements, merit.
Mhm.
And many of them now are CEOs of high tech companies that
Mhm.
came up, grew up,
Mhm.
or when they came to the US, were converted to that ideology by their parents, by the people that came ahead of them.
Mhm.
And many of them, casually talking to them on the sidewalk in the several hours that we had to wait to get into the rally,
Mhm.
many of them were saying they don't understand how generations of minority groups can be here for hundreds of years and still be on welfare, still be unable to, provide themselves and for the country. And
Mhm.
here they've been here 10 years, 20 years, and they're thriving.
Mhm.
And they push academic achievement and professional achievement on the part of their children as they do for themselves.
Mhm.
And it's a whole generation, and many of them are still friends of mine and my wife's and you. And that's how we got to be introduced to you. And this podcast was that they heard me speak on other podcasts or in other public speeches,
Sure.
some of them at Freedom Corner outside the DC jail,
Mhm.
um, talking about these issues and
Mhm.
really, realizing that your generation of Americans is extremely special to this country. And many of the other migrants, immigrants, whatever, refugees that came to the United States and didn't come here looking for a handout. You came here looking to be rescued
Mhm.
from where you were growing up, whether
Mhm.
it was growing up with the CCP in China and being under that regime or other, apartheid in South Africa, like Elon and his family grew up with. But many growing up with this kind of pressure or tyranny, basically, and came to the United States because they wanted to be free and they
Mhm.
wanted to come to America and with the right ideas and the right ideals. Now we see people here that just take it for granted. I want, give me this and that, and introducing woke technology and all, woke ideology, all
Mhm.
of those things that are basically anti-merit,
Mhm.
meritocracy, achievement, accomplishment. And
Right.
I think that's the difference. And that's what separates you from many of your friends, or Elon Musk from many of the people that came here from African countries, um, other countries that were difficult. Now we look at the wave of Venezuelan migrants that are here. They're not
Mhm.
here. Look, many may be looking for freedom, but many are just criminals escaping jail.
Mhm.
So, I think that's the difference with what's going on in the country now. And I think Elon Musk is looking at this, that if he's going to have a successful space program in the future, if he's going to be able to achieve exploration of the planets, starting with the moon, not a planet, but then Mars is a planet,
Mhm.
he knows he's going to have accomplished
Mhm.
young people coming out of academic institutions, whether it's MIT or some of the other schools of science and technology, that want to achieve, that want to be part of a successful program on behalf of the United States, on behalf of themselves, on behalf of the world.
Right.
And they're not here looking to be taken care of or coddled or put on welfare
Mhm.
or to be crybabies, that they're being discriminated, they're being picked on, all of that type of thing. And I think Elon Musk exemplifies that generation of newcomers to the United States, your generation of newcomers to the United States, my grandparents' generation that came here for the same good reasons to be here. And that's the difference, I think.
Thank you so much, Tom. You really touched me. Thank you. And then I really appreciated your understanding of the generation, like my generation, the first generation immigrant to this country. I think when we come here, at least when I come here, it's not because American is a rich company. It's a land of opportunity to me.
Right.
When I came here, I'm so happy that I have the opportunity to work hard to get what I want, and some achievement, if we can use that word. But yeah, we have American dream, and that dream is not get rich here in the American. It's get the opportunity, and we work so hard, and we're so happy and proud of we work so hard. to pursue your dream, to pursue the American dream. So
You
we
know,
really,
people refer to the greatest generation as the Americans that fought World War II.
mhm,
But there's another great generation that came after World War II, that came to the US in the 40s and in the 50s from other countries that wanted to be Americans. And I'll give you an example. My mother's mother and
mhm,
I became very close. So my grandmother lived several blocks from where we did
mhm,
in the south suburbs of Chicago.
mhm,
And so I was always at her house. You know, she had no English in her background. She grew up rich in Mexico and had servants that, you know, made the tortillas and made the dinners and took care of everything. And so she comes here and she says, okay, completely poor, no welfare.
mhm,
And she's convinced her children are going to be Americans and her grandchildren. So
mhm,
now I'm over helping her at her house
mhm,
several days a week, stayed
mhm,
overnight there several days a week, um, all through being young, up through my teenage years, through high school. And you know, and she'd be watching Spanish speaking television being broadcast out of Chicago.
mhm,
And you know, and I would ask I would sit and keep her company, and I would ask her, please teach me Spanish.
mhm,
Because when the adults were together, the older generation spoke to each other in Spanish.
mhm,
And so I wanted to learn all that. She basically, the policies of the adults was you can stay in the room while
mhm,
they're all talking Spanish, keep your mouth shut. If you open your mouth and interrupt any adult, you're out. You're out of the room.
mhm,
And so my grandmother, her philosophy, and this is back in the 1950s,
mhm,
they believed you could only excel at one language.
mhm,
And if you tried to learn another language, it would diminish the capability in the first language.
mhm,
And she basically said, my grandchildren are going to be successful Americans.
mhm,
They're going to learn English, the
mhm,
best possible English that they can speak. If they pick up a little Spanish, okay, but we're not taking time. She's not taking time. And she's, yeah, at the time, you know, 75, 80 years old.
mhm,
We're not taking the time to teach you Spanish, not
mhm,
because we don't want you to be proud of your heritage or learn Spanish, but we want your English to be second to none. So you
mhm,
can go to the best schools so that later you can be professionals, whether it's in business or lawyers or doctors or whatever.
mhm,
And you're going to have the best possible English. Now, later, you know, academic people now understand if you're young, like Melania Trump, you can learn 5 languages and be fluent in every one, up
mhm,
until a point, up until maybe
mhm.
8 or 10 years old.
Right.
Then after that, if you try to learn a language, it'll only be so-so compared to your native tongue.
Mhm,
And I have found that to be true in my adult years, trying to learn Spanish
mhm,
really well, trying to learn Italian, other languages, a little bit of Chinese. And I
mhm.
find that they're not that good. You know, I'm not that good in any of those languages. I'm better in Spanish because I grew up hearing it,
Mhm.
but English is number one and very much number one. And so she was right in that sense that my cousins, my brothers, and I learned English as the primary language, and we all excelled academically later and professionally later
Mhm.
because of having done that. And so now we realize, okay, when your children are young, they can learn multiple languages and be excellent and
Yeah.
retain that for the rest of their life.
Mhm.
But you know, that was the difference in philosophy. So here's a woman who is in Mexico, rich, rich family. They owned a chain of drugstores and other stores. Had servants. You know, when we visited her sisters and aunts in Mexico, you
Mhm.
know, lavish lifestyle.
Mhm.
But she decided, you know, in her early 20s, I'm not staying here. I want to go to the United States. I want to go to America,
Mhm.
where it's a free country, where
Mhm.
it's an excellent country. I want my children to grow up in America. I want my grandchildren to grow up there. And so
Mhm.
she gave up all of that. So she
Mhm.
comes to the United States. She doesn't know how to boil water
Yeah.
and have to learn from scratch.
Mhm.
Can barely speak a word of English. So
Mhm.
gradually she's learning, you know, through television and radio,
Mhm.
a small amount of English, broken English, but enough that we could communicate with each other.
Right.
Um, but that was the philosophy that she's going to come here and her children are going to be Americans, and she's
Mhm.
not going back.
Mhm.
And so what happened is they took much of the money that they made, come to the U.S. and invested in a chain of drugstores in Chicago.
Mhm.
Along comes the mafia in Chicago during the Al Capone days, and
Wow.
they go to the store owners and the drugstore owners and other business owners, and they say, okay, you pay us a certain amount of money every month, and we won't burn your business down.
Whoa.
And so my grandmother and her husband at the time decide, oh, this is America. We shouldn't have to pay gangsters. We shouldn't have to put up with that, and we're not going to. So sure enough, in the middle of the night, one of their 7 or 8 drugstores gets blown up. And in those days, there's no insurance for arson and all those things. So they decide, well, maybe it's a fluke thing. So they still don't pay.
Mhm.
Then, short time later, another drugstore. Now nobody got killed because it was the middle of the night, but another one of their stores is bombed out. So they decide that's it. They sell the chain of stores, take the money. This time it's going to be safe. They invest in the stock market. Then
Oh.
what happens? Stock market crashes. So my grandmother's husband, my grandfather, my mother's father, and she was the youngest of about 6 or 7 children.
Mhm.
He decides that's it. That's enough of the United States. We're going back to Mexico. And my grandmother tells him, if you go to Mexico, you're going by yourself because the
I see.
children and I are Americans now. We're staying here no
Mhm.
matter what. And there's no welfare. There's no one taking care of them. They did it on their own. Now, part of the investments when they sold the drugstores, they bought a farm in Michigan. So they had an apartment building in Chicago, a
Uh-huh.
farm in Michigan, and that's where my mother was born on
Oh.
that farm. So she was determined. That's it. She's stubborn, absolutely dedicated to
Mhm.
being an American and having her children and grandchildren and great grandchildren be successful, not just Americans, successful Americans because of their ability to achieve academically and professionally. And that turned out to be very, very true.
What a wonderful story. Thank you so much for sharing your family history, and it is so touching. And
The reason I share that so openly is because I know that you and many of your viewers of this podcast have very similar backgrounds. And especially, in the Chinese culture, much like in Latin culture, like in Mexican culture, when the adults got old, grandparents, let's say, they weren't kicked out of the house. The families took care of them. They
right.
they brought them in. Now, my grandmother's case, she had, about 7 or 8 kids. So what
Mhm.
they did is they all chipped in and
Mhm.
bought her a small house and paid for it. So she could still live on her own, live in that house
Mhm.
with my godfather who moved in with them, who was his own kind of refugee that he grew up helping them on their farm in Michigan, and they took him in. So that was the background they have. But now that I've met so many people,
Mhm.
uh, like my wife's friends and family and others, and you, and many, many other people that have come from all over the world with the same idea of going to be an American. It's
Right.
not going to be easy. Nobody's going to hand it to me, but I'm
Mhm.
going to do it. And I'm
Right.
going to be successful. And then when I am successful, I'm going to tell other people how to be successful, how they can do it too, and how they should do it. And, basically, like what you're doing on this podcast is telling the public, don't pay attention to the lies that the people on the left, that the progressives and the woke and everyone are spreading.
Mhm.
Don't listen to that. It's false information, and
Mhm.
it's not the direction this country needs to go or should go.
Right. Exactly. With your help. And I really, really appreciate. Thank you so very much. And the same thing that we hold dearly is the American spirit. The American spirit is this is the land of opportunity. This is the home of the brave. You decide to come here, you decide to become American and be American. Just do it and work hard. And just believe that if you work hard, if you work right, you'll get what your dream is. So yeah, I do really appreciate it. I do understand why your grandparents, why your grandma is so determined to stay here, to have her kids, her grandkids to become American and successful American. I really, really understand her, and I really appreciate that you share the story. And that's why we're together. And thank you so much, Tom, to spend your time to talk to people, to talk to the public on in this critical situation, critical time of this land. And even though when we come here, we are adult, but we really consider this is our hometown. So we'll fight for this land. And thank you again so very much. And
Well,
then
thank you, and thank all the viewers of this podcast who I really appreciate the fact that they watch it and the fact that they want to see me on here as well. And that means a lot to me that, you
yeah,
know,
they
I
really
come
want
on here and I'm not talking to myself. I'm talking to you and your friends and colleagues, and it means a lot.
right. We have a lots of viewers when I translate into Chinese. So I have so many audience. They wanted to listen to you, but maybe they want to learn, like to hear the Chinese translation. They really like to see what you see in this situation and what your thought in this situation. And they are from all over the world. They're
Right.
very worried about American, the direction, because they love this country. And then we talk about you mentioned about uh, NASA. Actually, they failed of their duties on after Obama. And right now, another federal agent that draw our attention is FEMA. So what do you think about FEMA? Are they really do their job, or they are just saying something and have not really give a hand to the
I,
hurricane
I think
victims?
they're like many U.S. government agencies right now who have had incompetent people put in charge and then hired senior managers who also that get hired not because they have merit, that they have achievement, that they've proven that they can be successful in running in crisis management, let's say. No, they're the right skin color. They're the right sex. They're trans. They're gay. They're LBGTQ plus minus minus whatever. That's why they got hired. And their incompetence shows when people are absolutely in distress, when probably the worst hurricane in history strikes the United States and strikes into the South, the people
Exactly.
of North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, in that area, that path of the storm, that are just wiped out. And
Mhm.
we see FEMA being just incompetent. And then now, and just to show how stupid our government is, you wonder if people are paying attention to any news at all. You
Mhm.
have the news that just comes out that FEMA's broke. We can't help the people. Congress has to give us more money. And until they come back to work and pass a law and send us money, too bad. We don't have the resources to help
Mhm.
millions of people in distress.
Mhm.
But we have $190 million to send to the
Yeah.
Ukraine.
Yeah.
No problem. And the fact that they would announce that at a time when there are so many people in distress in this country shows you just how completely stupid they are, how completely ignorant, how completely unsympathetic or lack empathy for the
Mhm.
millions of people. You have people that, when the flood waters came through and they watched members of their family trying to cling to their roof get swept away and killed,
Mhm.
never to find their bodies again. And so you have that kind of situation. And originally, you have the government, when people are trying to fly private aircraft in to help in the rescue and deliver water, the basics of life. Um, you have the government saying, "No, we don't want you because your aircraft will interfere with our rescue aircraft." What rescue aircraft?
There is.
What
right.
helicopters are FEMA helicopters being brought in to help anybody? We just don't see it. And I think that the last time we saw a president that lacked empathy, was George Bush flying over Katrina territory, looking down, and you see a picture of him in the Air Force One looking down out the window, and the public basically getting the idea he really doesn't care that much to do
Mhm.
that. Now you have uh, Kamala, Joe Biden, this disaster hits, and days go by. They don't even make public statements. While the people are coping with this
Uh, Tom,
disaster
Tom, excuse me, Tom.
in the
Hello, Tom.
South, southeastern part of the United States, while that's happening, and he says later when he's questioned about it today and 2 hours a day,
Hey, yeah, I
still
think,
no connection.
yeah. Now you're okay. Now you're okay.
Okay.
Okay, so you're talking about when George Bush had on his Air Force One.
Yeah, I don't know what that problem is.
Yeah,
I start talking bad about
yeah, yeah, exactly. You
the
st-
administration and mysteriously on a computer.
that might be the case. Yeah, you mentioned that George Bush went to the to see the hurricane, and people saw his in the Air Force One, and
Okay,
people,
now you're
oh,
coming in garbled. Hello?
really? Hello,
Hello?
hello. I
Can
can
you
see
hear
you.
me?
Yes, I can see you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you and I can see you. It looks
Okay.
like it's back to normal. And you just said some bad words about the administration, saying that they don't
Yeah, I
really.
was saying that at the height last weekend, at the height of the disaster, that people were still waiting for assistance
Mhm,
from FEMA, from anybody, and weren't getting it. You have
mhm.
Joe Biden sitting on the beach in Delaware. When
Yeah.
he's questioned about that, he says, I spent 2 hours on the phone yesterday. I
Mhm,
spent
yeah,
two
yeah.
hours on the phone the day before. So what? And then Kamala Harris is attending a political fundraiser in San Francisco. She
Mhm,
could care less. So you
mhm.
have the two leaders, president, she might be a candidate for president. She's still the vice president.
Yeah.
Biden is still the president. They don't
Mhm,
like it. They do a terrible job at it, but
mhm.
that's their position. And you have all of these people all over the South, millions of people suffering,
Right.
lacking communication, lacking
Food,
anything,
everything. Yeah.
water, shelter.
Mhm.
And that's the state of the presidency that we have right now.
Exactly. And Musk just said that 80% of the federal agents could be fired if he's in charge. Do you think that's a reasonable number? 80% of the
Well,
current.
I think the problem there is that's probably a number that should be fired, but then they have all of the civil service protections, and then they sue the government, and they have all these liberal Democratic judges to protect them. So it's more easily said than done.
Right.
Uh,
Mhm.
and so like the old expression, when all is said and done, more is usually said than done. And that's basically the situation, is that a lot of what he says, a lot of what former President Trump says, um, unfortunately, they don't necessarily have the power that, people are accusing them they're going to be a dictator. No, they're really not, because the courts are going to protect all these incompetent people that they may want to get rid of and won't be able to.
Mhm. That's right. That's a sad fact. So I don't know how American can fix this country. Well, we definitely need to fix this country. So maybe they cannot fire 80%, but if they can do 40%, that will be a great achievement.
Agree?
The
Yeah.
direction is right.
Yeah.
And also, he mentioned about Epstein uh, clients list. and he has an interview with Tar Carson last night, and he mentioned about the name list, the client list, and then he said President Trump will release the list, and he mentioned the name Bill Gates and some other famous, the founder of Linkedin, sorry. So what do you think about the list? Do you think it can really be released?
It, it could be released. Whether it will, we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see what deals are made and what politics enters into. Uh, because many of the people on that list are also major donors to
Oh,
both
yeah,
parties and
exactly.
have their own power base and have their own abilities to
Right.
intimidate people or censor people.
Mhm.
So we'll see. Just like all the people that are going to be deported, we'll see about that too. So there are a number of promises that Trump would like to make and keep.
Mhm.
Whether he can, we'll see.
I
Uh,
see. And then, so this brought another story, another question about Epstein. Is he really just a bank in Wall Street, or he has some special background in order to do such a big thing? Like he almost have everyone in power to get into his plane, his island. So I think he's not just a banker. There are so
no, the
many.
rumor about him
Uh,
was that he was an Israeli agent, that he was part of Mossad, and
mhm,
that his mission was to get these politicians, compromise them, film them
mhm.
with young girls or
Right.
young boys or whatever, and get all of this information, intimidating information that could be used to blackmail them and provide that to the Mossad in Israel so that the Israelis could get what they want out of the United States. So if you're looking at members of Congress,
Mhm.
um, many, many knowledgeable people now say wields in the United States. He gets virtually everything. He wants weapons or political support. We'll see.
You know what, Tom? We actually lost again. When you state, when you start to say the Mossad, Israel intelligence,
I started
so,
to say that there are many people who believe
right.
that Epstein, his mission was to gather intimidating or blackmailing information against U.S. policymakers, whether they be business leaders or politicians, senators, congressmen,
Right, right.
whatever, and to find out what some of these people, the evildoers, what they really want behind the scenes. Do they
Mhm,
want young girls? Do they want young boys? Do they
mhm,
want money? What
mhm,
is it that could be obtained to blackmail them into the policies that support Israel to do whatever Israel wants,
mhm,
to make
mhm,
sure they get all of the weapons, all of the bombs, all of the aircraft, everything they need to wage the type of wars that they're waging in the neighborhood, whether it's against Hamas or southern Lebanon against Hezbollah or against the Houthis in Yemen or whoever it might be. But,
mhm,
Israel pretty much has gotten what they want
mhm,
when they want it.
mhm. Exactly. So maybe we should talk about Israel in another time because it's a really complicated issue, but it seems like an issue. So, yeah, I personally just wonder, there are so many bankers in Wall Street. Why him? Why he has so much power, and why these people, you just mentioned the leaders from business, from politics, from entertainment industry, whatever you name it, and why they listen to him. Why he's so special? I just have the general question about this person, and I think he's not just a banker, and he has a lot more than that that we just don't know. Uh,
No, and you have many of the people involved in that with him
mhm,
who even now are trying to prevent the list of names to get out that he
Mhm.
was doing business with, that he was taking to the island, that he was, you know, having all of these operations with, let's say, or negative activity with.
Right.
And, yeah, so there's a lot that could be learned that really so far has not. Tip of the iceberg only has been learned.
Right, right. And the other thing happened in California, I think you probably already know, is that California Democrats passed a litigation that banned requirement of the voter ID. They
Right.
banned, yeah, and Newsom signed it, and it's become a law in California. So, it become ban the voter ID requirement, and I think this is the basic when you talk about election, and they just banned it. I cannot
Yeah.
believe, but it's happened. So this is a simple fact, and I just wonder why so many people still cannot see that the Democrats are doing the bad thing and still want to vote for them.
I don't
They
get it. I don't get it either.
I don't get it because I cannot believe they passed the law
Right.
that just banned the voter ID. Indeed, I think it's illegal to have no voter ID to vote because we have such a clear law that said you have to be American citizen in order to vote. And why they ban
And it's funny, the Democratic Party, even to get into their own convention, you had to show IDs.
right.
You had to, identify yourself and all of that. So the things that they make people do, they're hypocrites because then they don't do it, when it comes to other issues like voting.
Mhm,
So I don't know. I don't know how they get away with it. And I think what happens is that the Democratic Party and people like Newsom do so many terrible things over and over
mhm,
that the lawyers can't keep up with them. They file all these lawsuits. The Supreme Court can't hear every single one. And that's how they
mhm,
just inundate everybody's court system and get
mhm,
away with it.
mhm.
So I don't know.
That's something we need to fix in the future as soon as
Right,
possible, right? And
right.
then we have today's 8th, we have 28 days till November 5th, less than a month. So Tom, what are some possible things will happen that could affect the election in the meantime within the 28 days?
You
You think
know,
peaceful or something could happen?
absolutely. I hate to say it out loud, what could happen.
Yeah.
So, if you look at the worst case scenario, the attempts made on Trump's life
Mhm.
already.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's going to continue. They're going to continue to try to kill Trump
Mhm.
up until the election. And then after the election, if he wins, up until inauguration in January. And if he gets inaugurated while he's president. And that's one of the reasons I've told people that the vice presidential debate was extremely important. It was
Exactly.
extremely important to see
Mhm.
somebody as smart and
Right.
capable and patriotic as J.D. Vance
Mm-hmm.
go up against this nitwit from Minnesota who Kamala picked to be her vice president.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you look at that, um, if Kamala gets killed and Tim Walz was become president if she got elected, well, how much how much damage is that compared to what you already had with Kamala? But in
Mm-hmm.
the case of Trump, for him to pick somebody as competent and capable
Mm-hmm.
as JD Vance,
Mm-hmm.
how important is that? Because
Exactly.
you're looking at a situation where ideally if Trump survives all of this attempts, they just finally agree that they can't get him, or they're
Mm-hmm.
going to stop trying to get him,
Mm-hmm.
or it'll only get worse if they do get him, and
Mm-hmm.
somebody like J.D. Vance comes in with a mandate,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody in the country supports him to fix this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that could change everything. So
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at, Trump's decision to pick J.D. Vance. He could be picking could be the next president for 4 years of Trump and 8 years of Vance.
Mm-hmm.
Because that
Exactly.
automatically puts Vance as the front runner
Mm-hmm.
since Trump can only run for one more term.
Right.
So be president no longer than 2028, and
Mhm.
then Vance could run and get elected for 8 years. So you'd have 12 consecutive years of Trump and Vance. And
Mhm.
I think that, anybody that's halfway intelligent should look at it that we probably would not have a country left if Kamala Harris gets elected and then gets reelected 4 years from now. I
Mhm.
think that what a disaster we'd be looking at right now. Look at the policy. She can't even, in a way, thankfully, she can't articulate the policy she wants to put in. Luckily, they can put it together from all the statements she's made publicly for the last how many years. But the things she said are idiotic. And in a way, that's good because she can't be held accountable for saying stupid things.
Did you see a little video that she said 32, 32, 32 when the teleprompter stopped working and she looked at that and she don't know what to say. And she just repeat the days. We have 32 days for the election and 32. Yes, 32. She just cannot put a sentence together. And
Right.
I don't know why people cannot see that she is completely incompetent as the president of United States.
Well, the
So,
Democratic Party, that's why they work so hard at
mhm,
keeping the media on their side. So when they have these debates, the only fact checking is on the Republican in the debate. And that's one of the reasons J.D. Vance was so successful in the
exactly.
debate with Tim Walz was he
Mhm.
fact checked the fact checkers. So
Yeah.
when the moderators came up with nonsense, he goes, "Wait a minute, I'll fact check you," and he did, and he was correct. So I
Mhm.
think that the moderators just got destroyed by
Mhm.
Vance's simple, direct,
Mhm.
logical
Mhm.
statements,
Mhm. Mhm.
and his professionalism and his competence was tremendous.
Right. And he's calm and he just get to the point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So last 1 or 2 minutes, can you just give us your thought, your feedback about the debate, Vance versus Waltz? Remember,
I
we
think
mhm, go ahead.
I think that what Vance did in the debate that was crucial was the media, with on behalf of the Democrats, for
Mhm.
months have been saying how terrible he is. He's a fascist. He's mean. He's this. All the negative things they said about Vance before.
Mhm.
Vance disproved in
Yeah.
that hour and a half debate. He showed his real capability, how smart he really is, how
Mhm.
much he really cares, how patriotic he really is.
Mhm.
And they couldn't make up for everything he said and did during that debate, undid all the lies they've been telling about him for months.
Mhm.
And I think that that was the most significant thing because a lot of the country didn't know J.D. Vance. They didn't know, that he's a senator from Ohio. So what?
Right,
You
right,
know,
right.
he was a Marine. So what? He
Mhm.
graduated almost first in his law school class at Yale. So what? All of
Mhm.
these things about him that were true got ignored, and instead he said mean things, or he did this, or he did. And I think that Vance basically showed that's not me. Here's
Mhm.
who I am. Here's the
Mhm.
professional. Here's what you would get as vice president if
Mhm.
you elect Trump Vance ticket. And
Right.
I think that on the Tim Wolf side, people already realized the stupid things that he's done, the
Mhm.
dumb things that he's said,
Mhm.
and that there was no excuse for him as governor of Minnesota to let Minneapolis burn for 3, 4 days before he calls out the National Guard, to do
Mhm.
some of the other things that he's done, and then not explain all these trips to China and then lie that he was in Tiananmen Square in May and June of '89 during the riots when he didn't get to China until the fall, till about August or September.
Mhm.
So, oh, I misspoke. Sometimes I'm a knucklehead. Sometimes, I think you're a knucklehead most of the time.
Mhm. Yeah. So it's a really successful debate for Vance. And people,
Absolutely.
yeah, even the left media, they realize that. that
Yeah.
he is the winner, and then it make the MAGA people or the conservative American or just general American feel happy about the future, have a little more confident about the future, which is so important. And people just say that he and Trump, President Trump, is a very good combination as a leadership team. What do
Yeah,
you
and
think?
that leadership could be in place
Mhm.
for the next 12 years.
Yeah,
Trump gets elected for 4. If Vance will, I think, automatically, whether Trump gets elected or not, I think Vance is going to be the front runner to
right.
be the Republican nominee
Mhm.
in 2032. So I think that, and then he could be elected and be president till 2040. So you
Mhm.
have the next 12 years
Mhm.
where we could have very competent, successful management of the United States
Right,
with the Trump Vance ticket.
right.
And I don't think we could look at 12 weeks of Kamala Harris and Waltz.
No, no, we can't. And some words to the voters, just get out there and vote and try to convince more people to vote. And
Yeah,
this is
and don't trust the polls. Whether they say Trump's winning or
mm,
Trump's losing, there's no point.
right.
Forget all that. Go vote. Go vote now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the middle of moving, my wife and I, from Fairfax County to Loudoun County, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
So, Virginia, with early voting,
Mm-hmm.
we voted immediately in Virginia. So, we've already voted, not knowing how long it would take us to get re registered in Loudoun County, and that could take weeks, who knows? So,
Right.
we've already voted. And
Mm-hmm.
so, my word of advice to everybody is vote. Yet, if
Mm-hmm.
your state has early voting, take
Just,
advantage of it, especially
mhm.
because you don't know if when the next disaster might hit your state and you can't vote on voting day.
Right.
What are the people in North Carolina in
Right.
that devastated region? What are they going to do to
Mm-hmm.
vote? How's
Mm-hmm.
that going to work?
Exactly.
So if you have an opportunity, vote now. The weather's nice, the sun is shining, whatever, vote because you don't know what may happen later. And if you look at Arizona last time,
Mm-hmm.
people waited till the day of election. They're going
Oh,
to go vote. They're going to vote for
right.
Kari Lake,
And
and then
then all of a sudden,
they go to the polling places and all the machines don't work.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, how unusual! What a coincidence! None of them could
Mm-hmm.
vote.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they only didn't work in the areas that were likely to vote for her.
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
that should be a lesson to everybody.
Sure.
Um, Vote as soon as you can vote. Get it done because you don't know what the future will hold, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's bad weather or computer virus, whatever it might be
Mm-hmm.
that'll prevent you from voting later.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take a chance. Vote.
Thank you so very much. I do really have few audience that they already have the bullet. And so should I vote now or should I vote later? So your advice is just do it now
Yeah.
as soon as possible. And we have some friends here to say hi and to say thank you so much for the show. And I really appreciate your information.
Well,
And
thank you for watching.
sure. And now also last question from our audience. I think she wants to ask Tom, the hurricane, is the hurricane the October surprise made by someone?
I was thinking that it could be, and
Hmm.
this usually an October surprise is something that's done on purpose.
Hmm.
Something, whether it's a terrorist attack or some
Right.
other thing like that is the October surprise. In
Hmm.
this case, the surprise might be even a surprise to the Democrats of how incompetent they've been in handling the first
Hmm.
hurricane, Helene, and now we have another hurricane that's going to hit tonight in Florida. So I think to me, that's the biggest surprise is that FEMA had always had a pretty good reputation. But
Right.
your reputation cannot be upheld if you're not funded, if you're
Hmm.
improperly, incompetently managed. And
Right.
what's happened in this country is the entire country is mismanaged. Start
Hmm.
with the president. Start with on to the vice president, on
Hmm.
to the cabinet officials like Mayorkas and some of
Hmm.
these other idiots that run these cabinet offices, all the way down to FEMA. And
Hmm.
so, you put these people in charge of these agencies, And if it's an agency responsible for public safety,
Mm-hmm.
it matters. These shouldn't go to somebody because they're the right sex or gender, or, I mean, orientation or whatever it might be, the color of their skin.
Mm-hmm.
None of that matters. Who has proven that they can run a crisis? That's a specific specialty that's actually taught in many agencies. When I
Right.
was becoming an executive in the FBI,
Mm-hmm.
we had courses for senior officials and executives of the FBI how to run a crisis. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't something that the crisis just fell in our lap, and now what are we going to do? We
Mm-hmm.
were prepared. We were taught,
Right.
and I've taught others since in my retirement years
Mm-hmm.
as a consultant. I've taught police agencies around the world how to deal and manage a crisis,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what the components are, what the communication methods are, how to do it, so that if they're the victim, whether it's the weather or whether it's terrorism or something,
Mm-hmm.
that they're in a position to take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people aren't. And now you have people in our government at the top that have no clue. And
Mm-hmm.
now and we have Kamala Harris polling close to Trump, close to that ticket. Uh, Unbelievable to me that they can even be in the same breath
Mm-hmm.
as the other candidates.
Exactly. Exactly. I thank you so much for your experience of how to become a leader in the disaster. And you have to train. You have to qualify people to have on the position to take care of business. And then I think, Tom, what this audience wants to know that if the hurricane is made by Democrats in order to destroy the red states, the Republic states, and to stop Mr. Trump from winning the election. I think that's maybe the meaning of the question. Um, People are talking about they can make some hurricanes. Do you think so, or they
Oh
don't?
yeah, I think I've seen a number of the studies concerning geoengineering,
Right.
and and a man named Whittington has geoengineering.org, and he
Mm-hmm.
was last week interviewed by Colonel Douglas Macgregor
Mm-hmm.
on on the efforts of the government to control the weather, going back into the 40s,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the methods. And some of the people are now saying that these hurricanes, when they're in the middle of water,
Mm-hmm.
Caribbean or the Atlantic,
Right.
um, the government is not really in a position to change how that hurricane is made. But the closer it gets to land,
Mm-hmm.
that they have the technology to intensify the storm. And that's what they saw. All of a sudden, a category 2 or 3 that in the past would have maybe hit land as a
Mm-hmm.
category 2 or 3,
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden in the last hours turns into a 4, and then a category 5, and then
Mm-hmm.
it hits land, and it's devastating.
Right.
And it's not the winds that are the most devastating, it's the surge, it's the floods that come from that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what they're talking about. The current hurricane that's going to hit tonight and tomorrow and in the Tampa Bay area,
Mm-hmm.
Hurricane Milton.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's how quickly did that intensify from a 2 or a 3 to a 4 or a 5?
Right.
Now
Right.
what they're saying, the damage is going to be the most intense storm to hit the Tampa Bay area in over 100 years, and it's going to be the storm surge. It's going to be the flooding that comes in Tampa Bay, in the actual bay itself, and then across central Florida. So the question there is what they're trying to, the left tries to say this is the result of climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Exactly.
is it the result of technology
Mm-hmm.
where they're controlling the weather for whatever purposes, trying to make the weather worse? So,
That's so evil. That's so evil. And one of our audience said that's weaponized the weather.
I saw uh, the Whittington podcast, geoengineering.org.
Hmm.
At the beginning of his podcast, he shows a speech being given by President Lyndon Johnson in the
Uh,
mid 1960s, where Johnson says, "We can control the weather, and he who controls the weather can control the world." And at that time, through the 40s, 50s, 60s, you had a number of companies getting patents on the chemicals that they could dump into the atmosphere, the sprays that they could do, the other technology that they could do to affect the weather.
Mm-hmm.
And, accusations were made in the 60s that the US was doing that in Vietnam, trying to create devastation. The Ho
Mm-hmm.
Chi Minh Trail, which went from North Vietnam into South Vietnam, is
Mm-hmm.
how the Viet Cong got all their weaponry and supplies from north to south.
Mm-hmm.
And they were saying that the U.S. was able to create devastating floods on
Mm-hmm.
that trail to try to, prevent as much of the war material from getting south that did get to. So that makes the question. It makes me, if you watch these Chinese channels,
Mm-hmm.
television channels, in the last 4 or 5 years, every 2 months, you have the world's all-time greatest flood, whether it's the Yangtze River or some other location, the crops being devastated, the people being flooded out. And you look at that and wait a minute, each of these floods ends up being the worst flood in 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
What happened? Are we seeding clouds, further west or east that
Mm-hmm.
blow over China and create all this additional rain? Are we doing this against the Chinese? Are they trying to do it to us?
Mm-hmm.
Good question. You
So,
know,
Tom, can you give me the name of the website you just mentioned, William?
geoengineering, one word,
And
.org. And
okay,
the gentleman that creates that is Dane, Dane Whittington, Widdington.
okay,
And
yeah,
like I
I'll
said, if you want to look at
mhm.
Colonel Douglas McGregor's podcast, last week he interviewed Whittington. So he had a
Okay.
long interview about whether we're weaponizing the
Mm-hmm.
weather, and in some cases, whether we're weaponizing it against ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, that is big. That is big. And then again, that shows um how deeply they hate American people, how
Yeah,
badly they hate this country.
right.
Yeah, well, thank you so very much, Tom. This is such important information, and thank you for your advice about the election, about what we can do to the election. It's just vote, do it.
Vote.
Yeah, thank you.
Like we used to, like in Chicago after the Kennedy election in 1960, when the
Mhm.
mafia helped, uh, have votes be put on the machines before the polls open. That's
Mhm.
where the expression, I grew up in Chicago hearing the expression, vote early, vote often.
Vote often. All right. Well, thank you so very much. And then, yeah, I'll translate these broadcasts into Chinese later today. And I do appreciate, and especially thank you for sharing your family story. It's really touching and really encouragement and remind us what is real American spirit is. And it's still here today with us, and we're going to fight for that.
Exactly. Exactly
Thank you
right.
so much. Thank you. I'll see you
Thank
next.
you. See you next week.
Yeah. Bye bye.